Hello. So today we will be talking about the endocrine system. So I'm going to get my PowerPoint pulled up for you here. We'll go ahead and jump right into it. When we think about the general goals of the endocrine system, again, the primary function of the endocrine system is to provide us with communication. And the difference between the endocrine system and what we see in the nervous system is the speed at which transmission or the speed at which communication can occur is significantly slower in comparison to how quickly we could send a message within the nervous system. So let's take a look at some differences here. So, kind of as an overview, what exactly is this system? What does it include? So we've got some glands that are going to secrete hormones, which is their kind of like the messenger molecule, into the bloodstream. And then that hormone is going to be carried in the bloodstream, and that can control or coordinate different things and have kind of an all-encompassing effect on the body, or it can go to a specific target organ, which we'll talk about. Okay. Again, as mentioned, the endocrine system has a similar function with what we see in the nervous system. However, communication occurs significantly slower and such. And again, the way we transmit signals or have communication within the endocrine system rather, relies on these glands, these endocrine glands. Oops, let me get my pointer out. These endocrine glands being able to secrete their hormone into the bloodstream, and then the bloodstream will carry them to the appropriate location. So let's take a look at where each of these endocrine organs are located. Okay. Again, they're pretty small in nature and they're kind of scattered. Look at this, they're kind of scattered all over the body. Okay. Most endocrine cells are made up of epithelium. They also contain some neurons, muscle cells, and fibroblast-like cells. So again, a little bit of diversity in regards to the tissue composition. However, like mentioned, they are small and they are kind of scattered throughout the body. They're also richly vascularized organs. So again, there's a rich blood supply to these particular organs, and that makes sense. That's very important if they are going to release their substance or release their hormone into the bloodstream. It's important that they have access to that blood pretty easily. So let's take a look at each of these organs, where they're located. We'll get this kind of filled in, and then we'll take a look at what each of the endocrine organs are going to do for us. Let's see. So the pineal gland is up here. That's these little yellow dots. So again, it's located, very closely to the brain. It's kind of on that lower or inferior portion of the brain. The hypothalamus has both. Here we go. Hypothalamus. Blue here has both neural function and endocrine function. Okay, and then the pituitary also right here, kind of this lower portion, again contains both neural and endocrine properties. So we'll talk about that. The thyroid gland is here in purple. Okay, so it's located kind of in the neck. The parathyroid are these little yellow dots. So generally people have 4 of these parathyroid glands. Thymus is actually decently sized. It's pretty good size, and this sits directly superior to the heart. So it kind of sits right on top of the heart. So the heart would lie here, and then the lungs kind of surround both the heart and the thymus. Okay. Let's see, adrenal glands are going to sit on top of the kidneys. So you can see those here. Pancreas here in yellow, located close to those digestive organs. We've got ovaries, which again for females are located here, and they're going to be connected via the infundibulum to the uterus. And then for males, we have testes, which are located in the scrotum here. My little guy over here. So again, how do they send their signal? A couple different ways. So hormones are going to be secreted into the bloodstream, and that's going to circulate to the entire body. However, what is unique about hormones is they could encounter really any tissue within the body or any structures. They're only going to have an effect on specific target cells. So a target cell must have a specific receptor or a specialized receptor in order for that hormone to have an effect. Okay? So effects of a particular hormone are pre-programmed based on where they bind. So the hormone itself doesn't carry any instructions. It just kind of allows us to turn on the light switch. Okay, so again, they're going to cause stimulation or turn off the light switch, but they're not actually going to carry instructions in regards to how to make the light work or how to cause that change. It's just going to allow us to stimulate something to happen next. So again, the hormone itself is simply a messenger. Okay, so again, this kind of takes a look at what's going on with the hormones and how it would have an effect on those target cells. Okay, so here you can see your endocrine cell, or that endocrine gland, for example, and it's going to secrete or release that hormone into the bloodstream. Once the hormone is in the bloodstream, it'll be carried throughout the blood, throughout the body, and will then bind to specific receptors at our target cells, and that will allow those target cells to then have some sort of change within the cell, or do something. This just shows you another example of how this works. So again, let's say I have my secreting cell. So here's my endocrine gland. It released hormone here. And again, it can only affect a target cell that has its receptors available to be bound. Okay, so this hormone bound here to this specific receptor. And so therefore the target cell is going to have a change. Okay. Notice here, this cell doesn't have any receptors. It's not a target cell. So this hormone can't really do anything to that cell. So it doesn't really elicit any change in this particular target, or in this particular cell. It's not a target. Yeah, the ability to act upon a target cell relies on specific receptor molecules. Again, as we already mentioned here. Okay, how do we control the secretion or the release of hormones? So really 3 different ways. We can have humoral stimuli, and again, I think I have an example on the next slide of each of these. So humoral stimuli, a hormone is secreted in direct response to changes within the blood. So that's humoral. So, something happens in the blood, and so therefore I'm going to increase or release this particular hormone to cause a change in the blood, to allow that blood to better reach equilibrium or better maintain homeostasis. Neural stimuli, so the sympathetic nervous system or parasympathetic nervous system can stimulate the release of a hormone. So for example, the sympathetic nervous system can stimulate the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine for fight or flight response. So again, that comes from a neural stimuli, and then that's going to have an effect on the adrenal gland, which we'll talk about that specific example here coming up. And then you can have hormonal stimuli. So some hormones have a job of primarily causing the release of another hormone. Okay, so one hormone causes another one to be released, and so on. Okay, so they might be stimulated by the release of another hormone, creating this cascade of events. Hormones are going to function on a feedback loop, and this feedback loop can be positive feedback or negative feedback. In 99% of cases, it's going to be negative feedback. So this is going to help us maintain homeostasis and help keep things within a narrow range. One example of negative feedback, so again, I have a certain amount of calcium that I want to have within my blood. If I get too much in my blood, okay, that's going to stimulate one hormone to help us get rid of some calcium. If I don't have enough calcium in my blood, it's going to stimulate a different hormone that will allow me to increase the amount of calcium. Okay, the reason that that's negative feedback is once we reach back to that equilibrium point, it shuts off that hormone. Okay, so again, let's say let's say I wanted my calcium levels to be 100, okay, within the blood. Let's say they dip down and they get down to 80. Okay, so this hormone is going to be released. That's going to cause us to increase calcium within the blood. Once we get back up to 100, which we said was kind of like our goal, that hormone's going to shut off. Okay. Again, let's say we wanted to be at 100, and let's say it got up to 120, for example. Okay, that a different hormone is going to be turned on. It's going to help us to get rid of some calcium so that we get down to that 100 mark, and then that hormone will be shut off again. So that's what negative feedback is. Positive feedback works kind of the opposite of that. So with positive feedback, as a hormone concentration increases, the response is further stimulation or secretion of that particular hormone. So with positive feedback, it builds and builds and builds like a cascade. Okay, so imagine that the secretion of a little bit of this hormone causes the body to then release more and more and more and more. Okay, only a few examples of this within the body, which we'll talk about, but childbirth is kind of the classic example of this. Your contractions start just small, and then they'll get a little bit stronger, and then they get a little bit stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, right? So again, they start out small, and then we're going to continue to increase the amount of hormone that you have in order to stimulate more contraction. Okay. Again, this shows you examples of each of those different types of ways we can stimulate the release of hormones. So let's look at A here. And this shows us something as it relates to changes in the blood. So this is a humoral stimulus. So hormone is secreted in direct response to changes in the blood. So here's that calcium example that I just gave you. So if calcium levels get too low in the blood, that will directly cause parathyroid hormone to release their hormone, and that will cause us to hopefully increase calcium levels in the blood. Okay, so that's humoral. Okay, we said that the sympathetic nervous system could activate the adrenal gland to secrete its hormones. So here you see neural stimulation in letter B. So with letter B, sympathetic nervous system activates fight or flight response. That will stimulate the adrenal glands or the adrenal medulla, and the adrenal medulla, which is sitting on top of the kidneys, will then release epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay. Those two hormones. And then lastly, we said that the other way that we could stimulate the release of a hormone is through direct hormonal stimulation. So that's shown in letter C here. So the hypothalamus secretes several different hormones, but here's one example. They're going to secrete a hormone that's going to cause, multiple other endocrine glands to secrete. So again, think about this as like two different messengers, right? So the hypothalamus sends a message to the thyroid, and then the thyroid releases its hormone. So this hormone is simply a messenger to cause the next stage of that cascade. Okay, so let's now take a look at each of the glands and the hormones that are created and released from each location. Okay, so let's start with the pituitary. And again, the pituitary is located on the inferior portion of the brain. Notice that it is very, very close in proximity to the brain and will work very closely, particularly this posterior pituitary will work very closely with the brain. Okay, so again, there's two different regions. We have the anterior lobe, which you can see here in like the darker pink, and then that posterior lobe here, which you can see in kind of that lighter pink. Okay, in total, this little guy does a lot. Like he's secreting 9 different hormones, which is like pretty substantial. That's a lot of things for this little thing. Okay, so the anterior lobe is going to secrete. The anterior lobe is going to secrete growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, ACTH, MSH, FSH, LH, and prolactin. Again, I have a chart of that on your next slide, so don't worry, we'll go over that. The anterior lobe is made of glandular tissue, so again, it's gland-like when we look at the cellular composition, whereas when we look at that posterior lobe, this is going to be more neural. Okay, so the posterior lobe is primarily neural in nature, and it's going to secrete ADH and oxytocin. So again, I've got a chart to kind of show you what that looks like, but the posterior lobe is considered part of the brain, so the axons in this posterior lobe are going to connect directly to the hypothalamus, which you can see up in this picture lies directly superior to that pituitary. It doesn't make any hormones, but it can store and release them that come from the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus does the work basically for that posterior pituitary. All right, so let's take a look at what each of these do. Okay. So again, we said the anterior pituitary or the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland is going to release like 6 different hormones. So let's look at what each does. Okay. So growth hormone here is going to have an effect on liver, muscle, bone, and cartilage, and it's going to allow growth. It's going to promote protein synthesis, which allows us to have growth process occurring. Super important as part of development, but also important as part of our continued renovation of muscle and bone and things like that. So keep in mind that even if you're an adult, your bones aren't just stagnant, right? They're very metabolically active, and we're constantly kind of renovating them in order for them to maintain their strength. So growth hormone is important even in adulthood as well. Thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, is going to have an effect on the thyroid gland, and its job is to cause the release of thyroid hormone. ACTH is going to have its target be the adrenal cortex, and this will cause the release of androgens and glucocorticosteroids. This will help us deal with stressful situations. So this ACTH is going to be released in stressful scenarios, and it's going to do a couple things. It's going to affect metabolism. It'll help us to save carbohydrates for the brain, and it forces us in all other areas to rely on fat and amino acids for fuel. So again, the reason that we're saving those carbohydrates for the brain is the brain can only rely on carbohydrates as a fuel. So we want to kind of save those because your body can't tell the difference between types of stress. So it just assumes like any type of stress is like a physical life or death situation. And so therefore, you know, it wants you to like freaking go into starvation mode basically. And that can be stress like, oh, I got in a fight with my boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, right? So again, it's kind of interesting to see that your body can't differentiate between types of stress. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, is going to have an effect on either your ovaries or testes, depending on what your gender is. And if you are a male, it will help to stimulate sperm production or maturation of the sperm. For our ladies, it will have an effect on the ovaries, and this will cause maturation of a follicle during the menstrual cycle. Okay. So again, for ladies, FSH is very like cyclical in nature. So each month we're going to try to develop one single follicle, and that one follicle then becomes mature, and that's the like egg you release when you then are going to get your period basically. So each month you're maturing one single follicle. So again, this hormone for ladies is kind of like this up and down path each month. And again, that can vary from person to person in terms of like how much follicle stimulating hormone you need in order to cause that release. So there is some variation between females, but for a general, you know, if you're a regular menstruator, again, it's this kind of cyclical fashion that will release this FSH. Now for guys, a little bit different. So the stimulation of sperm production is kind of not necessarily cyclical. It's more based on supply and demand, you could say. So again, it depends on how often you are utilizing the sperm that you have. So for ladies, you know, you're born with a certain number of eggs in your ovaries, like you have those from day one. And so we don't like develop those so much, like we're not producing new eggs or anything like that. Like you're just born with however many, and that's like your life. But for guys, they can produce new sperm all the time. So for guys, this amount is highly dependent on how much you're using and how much, like I said, supply and demand basically for that. So not so cyclical for the guys. Luteinizing hormone is going to stimulate ovulation in our females. So FSH and LH are going to work very closely together for the ladies. So FSH is going to allow us to select a follicle, mature it, get it developed, and then luteinizing hormone says, okay, be released, and now you're ready to go into the world. And that ovulation process involves that hormone being released from the ovary into the fallopian tube so that it has an opportunity to become fertilized if sperm is there to meet it. Okay. So a little surge here halfway through your menstrual cycle, basically. For males, the luteinizing hormone is going to promote testosterone production. Okay. Prolactin, really not, I don't think you have this. I don't know that. I guess what's 100% certainty, but I feel, I guess, pretty good that males aren't having prolactin. It's just a female one. It's going to promote lactation in the female breast after the baby is born. So prolactin is going to help stimulate breast milk production. So again, not a everyday hormone that we're using, and actually it's stimulated or kicked off once we go into labor. So going into labor and having uterine contractions is what stimulates prolactin to start developing that breast milk, so that the breast milk is ready once the baby's born, which is pretty cool to think about, like that those processes are occurring just, right in order with each other. That's pretty freaking cool, I think. One other thing to note about prolactin is, again, for ladies, it'll kind of work on a supply-demand basis. So depending on how much milk you need, depending on how much milk baby is drinking, it'll try to replace that same amount. So again, it kind of works on a supply-demand type of schedule. So again, if I stop breastfeeding, eventually I will just decrease the prolactin that I am releasing, and therefore then the breast milk will stop being produced, basically. All right, we got oxytocin and ADH, or vasopressin, and these are coming from that posterior lobe. Oxytocin is, again, not your everyday hormone, but this is going to stimulate the uterus during labor. So this is what allows us to have contractions. Again, we said that this was going to work on a positive feedback loop. So again, those contractions start small, and then they get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger until baby is born, right? Again, the oxytocin also will stimulate prolactin to initiate that breast milk production. So it kind of kicks things off. Once baby is born, oxytocin goes down, and then prolactin will take over his job, which was to maintain supply-demand of breast milk. Okay. ADH is more of a kind of everyday hormone for us, and this is coming from the kidneys, it's going to have an effect on the kidneys, and it affects the reabsorption of water. So when we think about something that's a diuretic, okay, some examples of diuretics include coffee and alcohol. Coffee and alcohol make you pee, right? So if I drink a bunch of coffee, I got to go pee a lot. If I have a couple beers, I got to go pee a bunch, right? So an anti-diuretic is something that's going to make you not pee, right? So again, the function of ADH is to maintain fluids. Okay, so it's going to have an effect on the kidneys and cause us to retain fluids so that we're not peeing as much, basically. We'll do this in situations where we need to like preserve water, basically, like if you're getting dehydrated or something. Okay. This is just kind of a summary here that shows you the relationship between that posterior lobe, and you can see ADH and oxytocin here, and then our anterior lobe having its role as it relates to growth hormone, prolactin, FSH, LH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and then ACTH. So again, a really, really important component of the endocrine system because of the multiple functions, because of the multiple different hormones that are going to be released here. Okay, now moving on to the thyroid gland. Again, this is located like in your neck, basically, and its job is to produce two different hormones. It'll produce thyroid hormone and calcitonin. Okay, so let's start with thyroid hormone, which is going to be stimulated by thyroid stimulating hormone, which we just previously talked about on the previous slide. So that was coming from the pituitary. Okay. What does thyroid hormone do? Its job is to basically maintain or increase metabolism. So your basal metabolic rate is dependent on how much thyroid hormone you have. Okay, so it kind of has an all-encompassing effect on the body. So it's not just going to have like one target organ or anything else like that. But its main job is to increase metabolism. So you've heard of people that have like hypothyroidism. Hypo means low, so somebody who has low levels of thyroid hormone are likely to be overweight, cold, sluggish, because their metabolism is low. Okay. Individuals that have high thyroid hormone levels, or hyper meaning high, thyroid levels are going to generally be thinner. They could be hot easily. They can eat a lot of food and they don't have to worry about that because their metabolism is high, those types of things. So that's what thyroid hormone does. One interesting thing about thyroid, or that I think is interesting, I have a tumor on my thyroid, so 80% of it is encapsulated by this tumor, so I only have 20% actual function of the thyroid. But what's freaking cool about this gland is like that's fine, like it can function off of very, very little. So 20% is functioning, and like that works great in normal life. It's different with pregnancy because you need a higher metabolism because you're trying to build a baby, right? So you would need supplementation in that particular scenario. But for the average person to have, you know, a low functioning thyroid, like that's okay. You can still get by, and the system can kind of like make up for that, which I think is really cool to think about. Calcitonin is going to play a role in monitoring calcium levels within the blood, and calcitonin is going to be released when blood calcium is too high. Not a super common issue for us. It's mostly just in active children who are having substantial growth of their bones, where we might see calcium levels that are too high. Much less important in adults. When blood calcium levels become too high, calcitonin is going to cause the calcium to be excreted via the kidneys, and then osteoclasts, which we know are going to break down the bones, must slow down their release of calcium into the blood. They're going to break down at a slower rate. Both of these hormones contain iodine and specific amino acids. They're kind of like stored in an inactive form and then activated when needed, when released from the thyroid. Okay. Parathyroid gland, again, as I mentioned, you've probably got around 4, but another cool thing, we've got some individual variation, probably between 2 to 8 parathyroid glands. Your general pictures usually show 4. Okay. This lies on the posterior surface of the thyroid. Para means upon, so parathyroid is going to lie upon the thyroid gland. Parathyroid hormone is the only hormone that's going to be secreted here, and it does a few things. It has 3 functions. It is working in opposition to calcitonin. Okay, so it's going to increase the blood concentration of calcium. So parathyroid hormone is released when calcium blood levels are too low. Okay, so what are they going to do? How is this going to work? So number 1, 3 functions, 3, I guess, actions that we're after. It's going to stimulate osteoclasts to release more calcium from the bones. So again, we know that the bones serve as a calcium storage bin, and so those osteoclasts are going to be breaking down the bone in order for us to get calcium to put into the blood. Number 2, it's going to decrease excretion of calcium from the kidneys. Okay, so calcium that is generally found in the calcium is one of the components that's going to generally be released from the urinary system, and so we're going to slow that process down. So function number 2, decrease excretion of calcium from the kidneys. And then number 3, activating vitamin D, which stimulates the uptake of calcium within the digestive system. So that kind of up-regulates our nutritional aspect. So again, nutritionally, it's going to help us to absorb more calcium. We're going to try and get rid of less through less excretion of calcium in the kidneys. And we're going to take more of it out of the storage, out of the bone. Okay, so those are our 3 things. Why is it essential for us to have calcium in the blood? It leads to, or it's important for muscular contraction. So it's an essential part of muscle contraction. So if I don't have calcium available in the blood, I might have some cramping or some issues with muscle contraction. Okay, adrenal glands, again, as I already mentioned, they sit kind of on the superior side of the kidneys, and they're broken down into 2 separate, I guess, sections. So the adrenal glands have medulla, which is this internal portion, and the adrenal cortex, which is the superficial or the outer portion of the adrenal gland. And let's start with the cortex. So the adrenal cortex is going to release something known as corticosteroids, which can include aldosterone and cortisol. Okay, aldosterone is going to work hand in hand with ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, and its job is to help us conserve water through the retention of sodium in the kidneys. So aldosterone's job is to help us hold on to sodium, and sodium loves water. So if I retain sodium, the water molecules will also follow in behind. So that is the way aldosterone is contributing to helping us retain water, essentially. Cortisol is a stress hormone. So this helps the body to cope with stress by stabilizing blood glucose levels, and also inhibits inflammation as well. So again, too much inflammation can be bad for recovery process. So when we think about, physical stresses, cortisol is released kind of as a protective mechanism to help us to recover quickly from that hard exercise bout, for example. Okay, and then the adrenal medulla, which again was the internal portion of the adrenal gland, is going to release 2 of my favorite things. These are epinephrine and norepinephrine. And these are released as the sympathetic nervous system is activated. Okay, so they're released with the stimulation of fight or flight situations. Okay, so this is that surge of adrenaline that you feel. They have like a really cool effect on the body. Like they make you feel good. They make you feel jacked up, right? You think about having that sympathetic nervous system activated, and you're jittery and you're excited and you're like nervous. All of those feelings are related to epinephrine, norepinephrine. Another really cool thing that they do is, like, let's say you get this fight or flight response because you like wrecked your bike or something like that, or you had a major injury during a basketball game or whatever, right? The cool thing about these is they block pain receptors. So you don't feel pain because they're blocking that sensation. Again, it's protecting you so that you could continue to run away or whatever. Again, think about survival. That's pretty freaking cool, I think. Several years ago, when I lived out in New York, I was riding my bike, and I was on this kind of like this windy road, and I'm kind of like a daredevil, to be quite honest. Like, I'll bomb down hills when I ski. Like, I like to do a little bit dangerous things. But anyway, so I'm on my bike, I'm riding by myself, and I'm on this curvy road. It had just rained like right before I went on the ride, or maybe it was a little misty while I was biking. And I come around this tight corner and I don't make the corner. And so my bike comes out from underneath me, and I'm going too fast. Like, I'm being an idiot is basically what happened. So my bike comes out from underneath me, and I freaking just fly off my bike. And I had shorts on, and so my whole right leg is like just scabbed, like it's real bad road rash. Like, I was going like 18 miles an hour or something. And this truck, who's coming the other direction, sees me wreck, and he's like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Like, he gets out of his truck, like, "Oh my God, are you okay? Like, I just saw that you wrecked." I like slipped on because it was kind of wet, and I should have been more careful. It was totally my fault. And "Are you okay? Like, can I give you a ride home?" I'm like, "No, I think I'm okay. Like, my bike's okay. Like, like the gears are still fine. Like, I didn't, break anything on my bike." And he's like looking at me like, "No, but are you okay? Like, I have blood everywhere. Like, I'm a total disaster." And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I'm fine. Like, I'm just gonna go ahead and ride home." And he's like, "Okay." And he's like, "Well, I'm not like a creepy guy or anything. Like, my wife and son are in the truck, but we're gonna just follow you home to make sure you make it okay." I'm like, "All right, that's fine, whatever." So I like get back on my bike and I ride home, and like all I'm feeling is like this adrenaline, this epinephrine, norepinephrine, because I'm like all jacked up, like, "God, I'm an idiot. Like, why did I do that?" Like, just pissed at myself that I had this stupid accident. And now I've got all this road rash and everything. And so I get home, make it home, whatever, get in my apartment and everything. And then, like 15 minutes later, I go to like take a shower. And then it's like all this adrenaline has worn off, and it freaking hurts so bad. Like, I could not even sleep that night. It hurt so bad. Like, I still have a pretty good scar from it. Like, if this was a real bad wreck. But it was just like the epic example of epinephrine, norepinephrine protected me from feeling pain when it happened, but eventually that shit's got to wear off. So eventually that pain will catch up to you if you don't like get the ibuprofen and ice and whatever else you need to, like right away. But again, super cool, I think, the way that this works and the way it protects us, and I think that's cool. All right. Pineal gland. So again, we said the pineal gland is located in the brain. Yeah, we could basically say that. And it's going to release something known as melatonin, and this is going to help us regulate our circadian rhythm. So this is going to respond to visual cues to create a sleep-wake cycle. So again, the way that melatonin is released is going to be cyclical, and it's actually released related to if it's light out, if it's dark out. So I don't know if any of you have noticed this, but like in the summer, you might wake up earlier. So for me, like I don't sleep with the blinds down at all in our bedroom. And so I never set an alarm in the summer. I'm up by 6 most days because the sun is out and I just wake up, right? So again, melatonin is released related to whether it's light out or dark out. Again, it's tricky in the summer though, because then it also doesn't get dark until 8:30 or whatever at night. So that can affect our pineal gland. Maybe you sleep more in the winter because it's dark more, right? So you sleep in more in the mornings because it doesn't get light out until 7:30 or whatever. Maybe you keep all your blinds shut and kind of block out the release of this particular hormone anyway. But again, the other thing with college students is like you are not consistent sometimes with your sleep habits. So like, you know, maybe you get up at 8 every day, but then, you know, on the weekends you are out with your friends or whatever. And so you sleep until 10, 11 on those days. And so you don't have like a consistent pattern. If you create this consistent pattern, then melatonin will be released a little bit more evenly, consistently. So that's what's going on with that. So that's melatonin. Not to be confused with melanin, which has to do with our skin color. Melatonin has to do with these circadian rhythms or the sleep-wake cycle. So when it gets dark, it starts to make you feel tired, and then when it's light, it's supposed to make you feel more awake. Okay, pancreas has two things going on here. We have glucagon and insulin, and these are going to have an effect on our blood glucose levels. So glucagon is secreted by the alpha cells within the pancreas, and this is going to signal the liver to release glucose from glycogen stores and therefore increase blood glucose levels. So glucagon is released like between your meals basically, so that you can maintain blood glucose levels. Okay. Insulin does the opposite. So insulin is released from or secreted from beta cells, and it's going to signal the uptake of glucose into storage. Okay. So it's going to promote the storage of glucose as glycogen and also help us to lower blood sugar levels. So insulin is released right after we eat a meal. Glucagon is used in between meals so that we can maintain those sugar levels. So again, insulin helps us to store glucose or lower blood glucose levels. Glucagon is going to get sugars out of storage so that we can use those as a fuel between feedings, basically. Let's see, other things going on within the pancreas. Lots of different digestive enzymes are secreted into the small intestines from the pancreas. So again, it serves as a role within the digestive system, but then also within the endocrine system as well. Thymus. The thymus is going to secrete thymic hormones. Again, here you can see it is decent size. Check this out. You got your heart here, and then the thymus sits directly superior, and it lies, you know, medial to both of your lungs. So it's essential for production of T lymphocytes, so it's important for immune function. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Nothing too detailed with the thymus. And then let's take a look at some of these reproductive glands. So let's see, this includes, again, the testes located here for our males, and then also the ovaries, which are generally two ovaries. There we go. For the ladies. Again, those serve not only as an important role for the endocrine system, but also have many roles within the reproductive pathways as well. So testosterone's job is to maintain reproductive organs and secondary sex characteristics of males, and also to help promote the formation of sperm. Okay? Females actually produce some testosterone as well, just not near as much as what males produce. Same thing is true with estrogen and progesterone. Males are producing a little bit of these hormones, just not to the same extent as what we see within the ladies. Okay. So estrogen is going to maintain the reproductive organs and secondary sex characteristics in females. And progesterone is going to signal the uterus to prepare for pregnancy. So here you can see the uterus. So the release of progesterone, which occurs for like about 2 weeks out of your menstrual cycle, is going to help build up the lining within the uterus, and that'll allow us to prepare a welcoming environment if the egg does become fertilized. It creates a welcoming environment so that that egg could implant on the wall of the uterus if needed. Other endocrine structures, so again, other locations in the body where we're getting some endocrine responses, but not necessarily have a full endocrine gland. The heart is going to secrete something known as ANP, and this is released when blood pressure is too high, and this causes the kidneys to release fluid or help us to get rid of fluid. Again, sometimes when blood pressure is high, it's because we have too much fluid retention, and so this will allow us to get rid of some of the fluid in hopes of decreasing the blood pressure. Placenta, again, the only scenario where this is pertinent is during pregnancy, is going to secrete something known as HCG, and this is going to help with fetal development. HGC is the thing that we test when you first take a pregnancy test. So we're testing to determine if there is any HGC in your blood or in your urine. Okay, and so this begins its release when egg implants in the uterus, and the amount of HGC produced doubles every single day for the first trimester. Okay, so again, it's going to continue to just go up in order to help us with that fetal development in kind of those early stages. Kidneys are going to have two different hormones that they can use. We have renin, which is important as it relates to this whole fluid situation. So renin stimulates the release of aldosterone, and that will affect the sodium balance and therefore fluid levels. Okay, so renin is released, that causes aldosterone to be released. Aldosterone helps us retain sodium, which helps us to retain fluids. Okay, so renin is released in a situation where we might be like dehydrated and we need to retain fluids. Okay, so renin and ANP are going to work in opposition. ANP is going to help us to get rid of fluids. Renin, aldosterone, and ADH are going to help us to retain fluids. Okay. The other thing going on in the kidneys is this thing called the EPO, or erythropoietin, and its job is to help us increase red blood cell production. So if you've ever like given blood, for example, you will then have, as a result, an increase in EPO. It can take about 21 days for us to fully get those restocked if you did give blood, which is why you can't go in and give blood every week or anything like that. You can give plasma, but we can't give blood because with giving blood, we're getting rid of some of those red blood cells. So EPO is kind of always replacing, you know, like you're going to have some that we need to get rid of and that sort of thing. So it is very dynamic. But like, for example, if you were to give blood, then we would have a decent spike in EPO in order to replace those red blood cells. And then lastly, the skin will help us produce vitamin D. So vitamin D is the only vitamin that we can produce endogenously. So that means that we can produce it within ourselves. So we can make it ourselves. We can make it via exposure to the sun. So if we're exposed to the sun, I think it's like 2 to 3 days per week, 20 minutes per day. That's enough for us to stimulate appropriate or adequate amounts of vitamin D. We can also get vitamin D from foods or things that we drink, like milk, for example, and other fruits and vegetables. So don't worry if you don't get any sunshine. We can still get it from nutritional things. Why is vitamin D important? It plays an important role in calcium absorption. So the more vitamin D I have, the better I am at being able to absorb calcium from nutritional items. A couple different disorders to make mention. This one I think is freaking awesome. This is gigantism. So if I have a tumor in my pituitary, it can cause oversecretion of growth hormone, which can cause a child to grow like really, really fast. So if I'm producing too much growth hormone, I can grow super tall like this, up to 8 feet tall. How awesome would that be? How good would you be at sports? Well, maybe not, because you wouldn't be coordinated. I don't know. Yeah, I think that would be fun. I'd be down with having that. So that's what gigantism is. Okay, the same thing though, okay, if I have this over secretion of growth hormone as an adult, I get this other condition known as acromegaly. Okay, so with this, once the growth plates are closed, it's only going to cause enlargement in active areas. So notice that his nose and his lips, which again, keep in mind like the amount of abrasion or the amount of the speed of metabolism in those areas is very high, right? So again, we see kind of excessive growth in his nose and his lips, and then also his hands. So areas where we have metabolically active skin will be, have some growth issues here. Okay. One last thing to note is diabetes. Again, this is one that I like to talk about because it's so important in kinesiology and healthcare and that sort of thing. So just taking a look at the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So with type 1 diabetes, I am incapable of producing insulin. Okay. So generally this is an autoimmune disease, so the beta cells, which are located in the pancreas, have been destroyed, so I'm not able to produce insulin. And so therefore, if I want to move, so these are our sugars, and I want to be able to move my sugars into the cell down here, and without insulin to bind, I'm not able to move those sugars into the cell. Okay. Now look over here, type 2 diabetes is known as insulin resistance. And so in this scenario, my pancreas is working fine, I'm producing enough insulin and that sort of thing. But the deal here with type 2 diabetes is I keep overusing these receptors, okay? So basically I eat a high sugar diet, I'm not active, so I'm not utilizing these sugars. And again, insulin's job is to open up these gates and allow us to store these sugars inside these cells. And after a while of overeating and, not exercising, not using any of these, the cell's like, you know what, like we have enough sugar. We don't need any more sugar stored. So we're just not going to open the door when insulin binds. So these cells become insulin resistant. Okay. So again, sugar is here, insulin is here, the receptors are here. The receptors are not responding to the insulin. So therefore sugar isn't going to be allowed to go inside. All right. I think that is it for the endocrine system. I hope you have a great day. And again, let me know if you have any questions on the endocrine system.